I'm really happy to be here to do what I'm doing, and I'm happy to start off my presence by introducing somebody that has lately been very impressive to me. I just had the chance to interview Mike Barra at my studio in California. He's been doing a lot of excellent work. He's written several books, including Dark Mission with Richard Hoagland, and also the Ancient Aliens on the Moon and Ancient Aliens on Mars series. And he has a new book coming out about the secret space program. And I was able to talk to him about that a little bit, and I was super impressed at the information he's gathered. For all of us who are not sure what the secret space program is and what evidence may be out there to support it, I know I was one in that camp, he's really put it together well, and that book's going to be coming out shortly. But today, he's here to give you guys a very unique perspective on ancient aliens in art, on Mars and the Moon. And so without further ado, for a specially made presentation for here in Laughlin, let me bring on stage Mike Barra.
Yeah, I'll do the Trump thing and applaud myself. Gosh, I'm glad that was actually for me, because I was back there talking to Paula and I wasn't even listening. So it's good to be with you guys. I just, it's great to see so many people here and enjoying this event. It's been obviously a very intense and different week, and I hate to tell you this, but things aren't going to get any better in the next 5 or 6 years. We're going to continue to have a lot of shifts, and the ground underneath us is going to feel very unstable. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what it means is we get to choose our future. We get to choose what's going to happen. And one of the ways that we can decide what we want to do for the future is to look at what's happened in the past. So I'm way out of my comfort zone here in this presentation today. Paula asked me to do some specific things and talk about ancient aliens in ancient art. So that's what I'm going to try to do, and bring you up to modern times and just kind of look at the history of what may be a strong alien presence on this planet since the beginning of recorded time. Who's the guy you're all most looking forward to? Stephen Greer? Me? I don't know. Thanks, yeah, say me. That's better. I like that better. From ancient times, we have found cave paintings of creatures and beings that do not appear to be human. This is a cave painting from, I believe, France. It's at least 30,000 years old, and it shows a series of beings that do not appear to be human. They're various heights. There's a little gray kind of looking guy. They have these weird implements on their heads. Some of them have horns, and the question is, what are they? Are they extraterrestrials? Are they human? It doesn't seem like they could possibly be human, because humans all kind of looked the same back then. We were pretty much cavemen, and we've seen this type of artwork all over the world in various different places. Here's another example from the American Southwest of beings that appear to have spacesuits on, and they look vaguely like grays, and they have helmets, and they have, we've all seen these. They have these various different implements on their bodies and around their heads that makes them appear to be something quite different from the Southwest American Indian. It makes them look as if they came from somewhere else. Now, back in, these were thousands of years ago. Ancient Indians, ancient Indians, not ancient aliens, in the American Southwest, created these paintings of stuff that they saw. I mean, nobody paints what they have not seen. Even if you go forward to Al Bean, the fourth man to walk on the surface of the moon, he painted himself on the moon. You paint what you've seen. And judging by some of the paintings that have been created, it looks to me like back in the day that the American Indians were seeing spacecraft. They were seeing flying saucers. This is a standard flying saucer shape with kind of the disc-shaped bottom and the dome, the cupola on the top. And the interesting thing to me is, what is that jagged edge sort of stuff around the base of it supposed to be? Now, some people think that that's some sort of rotating lights being depicted. Other people think, well, maybe it's these runic symbols like we see on the Nazi bell. If you've ever gone, I've got a new book out, Hidden Agenda, NASA and the Secret Space Program. I've got copies out there, just to plug that. And I talk about the fact that the bell, that had this anti-gravity effect capability, didn't seem to really work until they put these runic symbols on it. It's like there's some connection between mysticism and science, and maybe that's actually what the ancient American Indians were trying to tell us with images like this. This, of course, is a very famous one. You've probably seen it on Ancient Aliens. It's a cave painting, again, I think from southern France. And it depicts very clearly two beings sort of floating through the air, and clearly they have helmets on. They have some sort of space helmets on. The edges, the glowing stuff appears to probably be light, probably means light beams coming from them. Something like angels were depicted later in American history. And to me, it's fascinating to look at this stuff because clearly this is two dudes floating in the sky with some sort of instruments in their hands, if you notice that, and they got space helmets on. Well, who would do that except space visitors, somebody who came from somewhere else who couldn't really breathe our atmosphere? This is another great example. It is a painting of inside a cave of what appeared to be gray aliens. Now, some of you that are experiencers, these guys may look familiar to you. Fortunately, except in a dream or two, I've never actually had any kind of visitation like this, but these guys certainly have the sort of oval-shaped heads, the narrow chins, the very, very slight noses, and the big black eyes that we've now become accustomed to seeing and depicted as the standard gray alien. This is a shot, by the way, from a YouTube video. What may be CGI or it may really be a gray. I mean, the thing that's interesting to me is that, you never know. So anytime we're looking at these videos and people say, oh, it was done on a computer, we don't necessarily know that it was done on a computer. This could actually be a picture of a gray alien. And of course, that's the very familiar archetypal view that you get from basically Whitley Strieber's book. I mean, this shape, this definition of what an alien looked like, and I have a tattoo right here of one of these, really came to light, really burst itself into the consciousness with Whitley Strieber's book Communion, which, of course, if you have not read it, it is one of the key definitive books to read on alien abduction. Now, even back in ancient Egypt, there are these depictions of what appear to be instruments. Now, some people say that this is just an Egyptian guy with a really big phallus. I don't personally think that's what it is. It looks like a light bulb. It looks like it's got some sort of coiled energy in it, and it's some sort of bulb. You see the flower-shaped petals kind of at the bottom. That would be the base where you have a lot of the electronics, and there's a cable running somewhere that's probably pumping power into this thing. Now, what these were used for, I don't know, but notice again that you've got the giant being there, the Anunnaki-type creature, and this device, and there's no question this is depicting some sort of technology that the Egyptians were not supposed to have had, yet there it is, right on the walls of one of the temples. I forget exactly which one. There are other objects. This one I got to read. I forget what this is called. Let me get my glasses on. The Lolodov plate, and this is an artifact that was discovered a few years ago, and it has the depiction of, on one side, very clearly, a disc-shaped craft there on the left, and then below that is a being who looks an awful lot like a gray, like an extraterrestrial. Here's a slightly enhanced version of it, and the whole thing looks like a flying disc viewed from the top. It's got a depiction of a disc from the side, and it's got this weird, big-headed, big-eyed, gray alien type dude, and this is several thousand years old. So where did these guys get these ideas? Where did they get these visions if they hadn't actually seen them? It didn't come from their imagination. It had to have come from their actual personal experience. Here's a color version of it. And of course, it depicts other creatures and animals, but you notice the spiraling sort of effect there, and at the top is the disc, and then at the bottom is that's not a man. That's not a regular man. Look at the shape of his head. Look at the size of his eyes. He's somebody else, somebody different. Here's another similar disc, the Disco I'm not Italian, Colganti. And And it, again, is a classic flying saucer, again, with the spiraling kind of arms. You could look at this and you could say that this is actually a depiction, a plan view, an upper view of the Milky Way galaxy, because that's kind of what it looks like. It's got this big bulging central core, and then it's got these arms spiraling out. But how would anybody in ancient times know what the Milky Way galaxy looked like from above? It's just not something that you would know. Or you could say it's actually a depiction of a flying disc, a flying saucer. Then you have other bronze artifacts from the Bronze Age that depict, again, weird-looking creatures with big eyes. They're in these disc shapes. Maybe this is an old, early metallic phonograph record. I don't know. Maybe the Egyptians had record players. I don't know. But this is, again, a weird kind of artifact that you find all over the world. There's depictions like this all over the place. Here's an example from an Egyptian temple of the sun, or what appears to be the sun, shooting down these rays of light, these rays of knowledge down onto the earth. At least that's what the mainstream experts say. But I noticed some other things. If you look at these beams, what do you see? You see animals floating up into the bright light, the way we've heard about cattle mutilations and cattle abductions. So is this actually an early depiction of cattle being lifted up into bright, glowing flying saucers and experimented on, and who knows, maybe they were deposited back on the earth in those days, I don't know. But again, this can be interpreted two ways, and it certainly is an interesting artifact. Now, of course, there's a lot of ancient Incan and Mayan sculpture and artwork out there. Here's a guy sitting in either a really small smart car or some sort of little rocket. I don't think they had smart cars back then, but look, he clearly is wearing a helmet. He's got a spacesuit on, and he's in some sort of vehicle, like a little rocket vehicle. This is the exact kind of thing that the Anunnaki would have brought to the Earth if they had come here, and they would have little things like this for transportation. There's even stories in some of Sitchin's books about them using these small transportation vehicles, and it sure looks a little cramped. I will say that that's about as much leg room as Spirit Airlines gives you. And of course, the famous tombstone from the Mayans of this guy, this king, flying a rocket ship. He's got foot pedals, he's got controls that he's turning, all this stuff that we've seen from the Mayans for years. And again, people argue that this is not what it appears to be. I think that the best way to interpret anything, and of course my background is doing interpretations of stuff that I see on pictures of Mars and the moon. That's primarily what I've done in the past, and some stuff on secret societies. But really, my philosophy is always, if it looks like a pyramid, it's probably a pyramid. If it looks like a flying saucer in a bunker on the moon, that's probably what it is. And if it looks like some guy flying some sort of machine, some sort of rocket, some sort of spacecraft or aircraft, that's probably what it is. And of course, back in the ancient Mayan times, there's absolutely no way they had that kind of technology. Now, as we move forward into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, we begin to see more and more depictions like this. We see very, very odd paintings. This is called the Crucifixion. The artist is not known, and it's from about 1350. And it's in a monastery in Yugoslavia. Does Yugoslavia still exist? No, but it was Yugoslavia at one time. And it shows Christ on the cross. Of course, it's got the very strong Catholic, images from those days. Christ on the cross, and it also has a bunch of, the saints and mourners and so forth around him. But in the upper left and upper right corner, you see two objects up in the sky. And as you get a little closer to those two objects, you can see that one of them is red, one of them is white. Now, the standard interpretation of this is that one is the sun and one is the moon. In other words, the moon is chasing the sun and the sun is chasing the moon. I don't know what that has to do with the crucifixion of Christ. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's actually stuff like that is pagan. It's ancient pagan stuff. And the interesting thing about it is, of course, is that there's the famous story in the Bible that, at the crucifixion of Jesus, that the sun went away, the sun went dark when he passed. And everybody's interpreted that as an eclipse. That's helped people date the possible actual date of the crucifixion. But again, this doesn't really fit that. this shows kind of a darkened sky, but it's still fairly bright blue, and it doesn't really make sense that you would have the sun unless that's not the sun. Maybe it's a comet. Maybe a comet passed over in the darkness. Maybe it was a passing of Halley's Comet or something. But the other thing that's really weird about it is that these two depictions of what are called the moon and the sun don't look at all like the moon or the sun. They look like little ships that two dudes are flying. They each have pilots. Okay, now is that the man in the moon and the sun? Who did the sun represent? I mean, in ancient times it was Horus. So is this some transliteration? Not transmutilation, that would not be the right word. Transliteration of the ancient Egyptian traditions. Are they working their way into this painting? I don't know. But the other thing is the moon has a logo on it. Okay, look at the guy on the right. It's actually got, I think I have another better shot of this here. Yeah, the moon, if that's the moon actually has a symbol, a logo on it. Like, I don't know, maybe the Anunnaki version of Boeing's logo or Northrop Grumman. And then the sun, definitely inside the sun, there's a pilot operating instruments, and there's a bunch of mechanical stuff inside there. So was the artist trying to tell us that the sun was actually a mechanical device being floated around? I don't know. There's a theory out there that the moon is a hologram. You guys seen that one on YouTube? That's pretty interesting. Which I think Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong would disagree with you, that it's a hologram. But again, all throughout history, you see these different paintings depicting various different types of craft. This is one from, I believe, without my glasses, 1523, and it was painted on the wall of a church in, I'm not going to pronounce that, I'm going to try to pronounce it. Sihirsora, okay, whatever. It's near where Vlad Tepes, Dracula, was actually born. It's very near him, but it clearly shows a disc-shaped flying saucer type, balloonish-looking object in the sky above the church. And it seems to be pumping out some gas or something out the top or out the back. Now, how does something like this make its way into a medieval painting from the 1530s? It certainly isn't a depiction of anything standard. It's not the moon, it's not the sun, it's not a comet, so it has to be, to my mind, something that the artist actually witnessed. If you look at the bottom, there's a little dome on the bottom. Do we have a laser pointer up here? Oh, the mouse. Hey, wow, a computer, a laptop. Okay. See this right here? This is like a little dome right in there, and it's got these sort of sections coming out of it. This looks like some sort of flying craft being depicted. Here's another shot of it, a close-up of it. You can see this sort of stream of clouds, which could be exhaust, it could be thrust, it could be any number of things. It could have been giving off steam. But to my mind, when I look at this, I clearly see a craft of some kind. And then we have the 1710 Baptism of Jesus by de Gelder, which is actually in Cambridge. And this is supposed to be a scene of Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. He was the guy who did all the baptisms back then. And in it, again, you see Jesus under this bright light, the light of God shining through 4 specific beams of energy. And of course, what they're coming down from is not on high, not the sun, not the clouds. It's some sort of disc-shaped object floating over the scene. Now, nobody who ever witnessed the baptism of Jesus, as far as I'm aware, nobody ever really painted this. Nobody ever put a pen to paper or whatever they had back then, quill to paper, and showed us what it looked like. But the depiction is clearly that there is some sort of energy exchange going on between Jesus and John and whoever is in that flying disc. Now, is that disc meant to represent God? Is it meant to represent some other intelligence? You tell me. All I know is it looks to me like a flying saucer. It doesn't look to me like anything that I would describe as Christian or Catholic. There's various other images like this. Here's the baptism of Jesus on the right. And then you have other Renaissance medieval paintings with what appear to be a couple of angels. I guess that's Jesus and probably John, which some people would argue is actually Mary. Maybe it's Jesus and Mary, floating on a cloud, but then behind them is a fleet of craft, a fleet of aircraft. Spacecraft. Well, we have to call them aircraft because technically they're in the atmosphere, but they could be flying saucers. I mean, what else are those? Anybody got any ideas? Did they have hot air balloons back in those days? No, they didn't. Here's a close-up of it. It's the Miracle of the Snow, and it's from 1400 in Florence. Jesus and somebody else, possibly Mary, floating on a cloud, followed by a fleet of flying saucers. So, you tell me. Now, this is a 15th century painting. It's a Madonna and Child with the infant St. John. And it's attributed to several different artists, and it looks really nice. You know, you've got the little baby Jesus there, I guess, with a halo around him, and there's the infant St. John, and Mary's praying over him, and it's a real sweet scene of love and devotion and the joy of life. And then you look over Mary's left shoulder, and what you see behind Mary is these annoying aliens again. Now, nobody knows why. There's a dude behind her. A dude, I keep saying that. There's a dude behind her on a hill looking up in the sky at this thing in the sky that's floating around. And what does it look like? Well, again, it's not the sun. Why would you depict the sun like that? You would depict the sun looking like the sun looks, like the standard rays, like they've been doing it since ancient times. And again, this is a flying object at an angle, disc-shaped or sort of balloon-shaped, giving off these different rays. And what? Observing, overlooking this holy event. Why is it that the medieval artists felt compelled to depict flying objects over these crucial biblical events? Maybe because somebody told them that it was really there. Now, we all know the Catholics know a lot more than they're talking about, than they've ever talked about. They've got those wonderful archives that we saw in Angels and Demons, the last Tom Hanks movie, well, before the last one that just flopped. But, you know, we know they know a lot of stuff. And I look at paintings like this, which many of which were commissioned by the church itself, and I think to myself, gosh, wouldn't it be great to get in there and go through their archives and see what some of this ancient knowledge really tells us, what they've really got. Here's another close-up depiction of it. There's the old man. He looks to me vaguely Roman, at least in Roman garb, but he's looking at this object, which is some sort of flying vehicle with rays coming off of it, or antennae. Could be golden antenna, I don't know. Here's another shot of a painting that is actually in Belgium, where Moses is depicted receiving the tablets of the Ten Commandments from a fleet of 4 flying saucers. Dudes in flying saucers, little guys. Now this one, one of these I think has been retitled. I was talking to Paula. Paula, are you here? Paula? I missed her. Anyway, she told me one of these has been retitled. I think it was the Virgin Mary one. They now actually include the fact there's a UFO in it in the title. So at the museum, it's, what was it again?
The Madonna of the UFO.
This is now called the Madonna of the UFO. You guys remember that old TV series UFO that was on British television with the American guy and the UFO? That's what we used to call them, UFOs. This is the Annunciation of Saint Amidus. It's by an artist named Crivelli. It's in the National Gallery in London. And again, what we see is an object in the sky, which could be the sun, but it's surrounded by a cloud bank, and it's shooting a single beam of light, like an arrow, out of the sky through a little opening in the building, and then right through into Mary's head. Here's a close-up. It's not really very clear in some of the depictions on the internet, but see how the light's coming through and shooting right down into this little opening right here? And it's definitely disc-shaped, and it looks to me like a craft. It doesn't look like the sun. It doesn't look like anything I'm used to seeing in the sky. Here is the best version of it I found online. Sort of a roiling, kind of vorticular, disc-shaped object shooting a beam out from the bottom. A beam of what? Knowledge, enlightenment, and it's going right into her cranium, right into her skull. So what is this trying to tell us? It's trying to tell us, we've always known, we've always been told that, our inspiration comes from on high. The Catholics like us to think it's Jesus or Mary or or God the Father that's giving us the information. The New Age beliefs are more about, it's your higher self and your spirit guides and your team of angels that are communicating with you. But these paintings seem to be telling us it's actually aliens that are communicating with us and putting ideas into our consciousness. And what is this supposed to represent? Is this the holiness that she has being given to her by some other outside source? Is that what this is meant to depict? And again, when you look at the three objects together from these last three paintings, it's pretty clear what they are. They're not the sun, they're not the moon, they are flying saucers. How did this stuff end up in these very, very famous paintings? What are they doing there? Here's a few other ones I found. These are from England. There is a depiction of Christ on the cross, and in the lower right from this one fresco at the top here, there's a disc-shaped object behind him. He's up on the hill, this is behind him. And then here's another fresco from England. And again, unless the English had a very unknown fascination with the sombrero, that is a flying saucer in the sky behind these two ladies of the court. I forget the title of this one, but it's, Again, more English sombreros. This is Summer's Triumph. It was a tapestry created in 1538, and it's in a national museum somewhere. I can't pronounce that name. But again, in the background, it shows flying discs hovering above these historic scenes. Here's, again, another shot of the very popular sombreros. Maybe the English like to throw their sombreros up in the air, and that was what's being depicted. But again, seems unlikely. And to me, you have to focus on the fact that this is these artists are painting what they saw. They're painting what they saw. And if that's what they saw, what does that tell us about the real nature of our history? Now, there are other examples of spacemen and space objects in artwork and a fascination with the stars and the gods. Of course, we all know about the Nazca Plains, the plains of Nazca in Peru. Anybody who's watched Ancient Aliens, seen Giorgio and my friend, my publisher, David. Giorgio is the face of Ancient Aliens. David is definitely the voice of Ancient Aliens. But they've all been there. They've studied the Nazca lines in Peru. This, of course, is the trident out at the edge of the continent that points inward. If you follow that inland, you eventually come to, here's another shot of it, you eventually come to, this is from Google Earth, the plains of Nazca, which look like what? An airport. Spaceport, an airport. These are long runways and taxiways that intersect. For what? It's on a big flat plain in the middle of nowhere for some visitors to have come down and landed. Here's another shot. That's a runway. I'm an aerospace engineer back in the day. That's what I used to do. I used to work on airplanes and satellites and stuff. That's a runway. Here's another shot of it. And again, you have these circular formations too that are more artistic, and some of these artistic interpretations. So this is one of my favorite ones from the show, where this is near the plains of Nazca, right up above it, and you can see the top of this mountain. Somebody just sheared it off. How did you do that back 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago? Yeah, I guess they worked a long time with chisels. They had 100 million people with chisels. Only that was probably more than the entire population of the continent at that time. Yeah, well, you don't need dirt. If you use some sort of high-powered heat weapon, laser weapon, nuclear-powered weapon, you just vaporize everything. It becomes steam. There are depictions of various birds. This one I think is considered a hummingbird, and this is what they drew on the plains of Nazca, only visible, of course, from the sky. So you're talking about artwork that's only visible from flying sombreros, maybe from England, that we're visiting. Here's another guy who actually is depicted on a mountainside near Nazca, and he appears to be a big-headed, big-eyed, and very friendly alien. He's waving. He's saying, yep, this is it. This is the place to go. If you look like me, this is where you want to land. Here's another better shot of it. And again, what's the explanation for these? If you're going to carve something into a mountainside, that really can only be recognized from very far away or up above, why doesn't it look like a person? What is this supposed to be if not an alien? See, the thing is the big thing with the ancient alien explanation for this artwork is that it's the best explanation. You know, you know how the skeptics are always trying to talk about Occam's razor? Well, what would possess an ancient primitive tribesman of some kind to make a depiction this size and go to all the effort of something non-human? There is none. The most logical explanation is it's some dude he met, somebody he knows, somebody he's familiar with. Here's another one. This one always creeped me out as a kid, you know? And again, either this is some sort of helmet or it's an early version of the Minion costume from those movies. But this guy has discs in the sky behind him. Some sort of suit, bodysuit is kind of loose-fitting. He's definitely humanoid, but then, you know, he's either a cyclops or he's got some sort of helmet on. All I know is I wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley at night because he's scary. It looks like a monster from The Outer Limits or The Twilight Zone or one of those early 1960s shows, you know, when all they had was the rubber stuff they could put on, rubber masks and stuff. It's creepy, it's scary. But I have to think it's somebody that the artist met or knew. Here's another depiction that's at Nazca, which everybody's like, oh, well, here's a spider, you know. Only it's, what, an 8-legged spider, and one of the legs seems to extend out to the right. Now, what this really is it's a depiction of the constellation of Orion and the star Sirius. Of course, if you've read my book, Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies, or Dark Mission, I've got Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies out there at the vendor area. You know the importance of the Belt of Orion and the star Sirius to the ancient Egyptian civilization. Well, apparently these were important to other civilizations as well, because that spider with the long leg is actually depicting Sirius and Orion, but in a mirrored way. In other words, if you laid on your back at the plain of Nazca and looked up and drew it exactly the way you saw it, it would look like this spider with the extended leg. Here is the belt. That's where the belt stars are. This is Sirius, and some of these are the other stars around Orion. Now, if you overlay them, it's pretty obvious. It's exactly what you're looking at. Now, what would be a primitive people's fascination with this constellation to the point that they had to depict it in a massive piece of artwork on a plain in Peru? I don't know. Maybe it means that these guys, I'll do David, maybe it means guys like this and guys like this came from someplace like this. That's all I can think of, but I think it's the simplest explanation. Now, this translates into other areas. There are other places where people think that they're seeing artwork. This is an example of what appears to be a dolphin. At least some people think it's a dolphin. It's on Mars. So people are arguing, and somewhat successfully and somewhat not successfully, that there are actually depictions of Earth-type creatures on the planet Mars. As you look at all these images, this one's supposed to be a dolphin. I think there's another one here. It's a roadrunner. Now, to me, this roadrunner here, if you look at it, there's vertical walls. I've got some better shots of it that I have in some of my Mars presentations. There's openings. It looks to me like this is actually some sort of buried bunker that has got a bunch of crap over the top of it, but there's entrances and everything else. But some people think it looks like a roadrunner. They may be right. There's other depictions like this. There's this guy, some people think, is supposed to be a seahorse of some kind, maybe a Martian seahorse. Are we stretching it? Are they stretching it? Because I don't necessarily ascribe to this. Are they stretching it? Well, not necessarily. Not if you look at the plains of Nazca. Not if you look at some of the other Renaissance paintings. Not if you look at the ancient cave art. I don't think they're necessarily stretching it. I don't think they're right. But we have to leave open the possibility. It's kind of like 9/11, you know, the 9/11 conspiracy. I don't think any of the stuff about Building 7 or the tower should not have come down or it was demolition. I don't think that's right. That doesn't mean there wasn't a huge conspiracy around 9/11 for other reasons. Here's a one that was actually promoted as what they call the king's face on Mars. So you can see that pretty well. It's really good. Most of the time, I want to really tell the audio-visual guys that this is the best equipment I've ever used for a presentation. It appears to depict a human face. Now, I think if you look at it in context, it's less likely that that's what it is. It looks like it could be just a series of natural formations that kind of went that way, but I don't believe in pareidolia. You know, the skeptics, the experts all talk about this mythical thing in the human mind where every time we see something, we make it into a face. Well, that's nonsense. That's their excuse to try to explain away the face on Mars or explain away anything else anybody sees in images from Mars and the moon. But I think in this case, we may not really have what we think we have. But there's other shots. Here's another shot, other examples. Here's a shot that Dr. Tom Van Flandern, who I greatly admire, believed was a profile depiction of what they typically call Nefertiti on Mars. Could be. Here's some other enhancements of it. Looks like a human face in profile. She's got an Egyptian-styled hat. Her lips, her eyes, her nose. It's kind of weird, and given the context of Nazca and everything else, it's possible that this is artwork on the planet Mars. Now, the thing that I think separates them and makes me more skeptical, even though I'm presenting this to you, is that to my mind, if you look at Nazca, everything's in one place. It's all there on the Nazca plain. These things are all spread out. They're not near each other. If they were all in one place, like a big Martian zoo, then I would be more inclined to agree with them. But I think it's something we need to seriously consider, just as we seriously considered this guy, the face on Mars. Now, you could say this isn't really appropriate in terms of it being ancient alien artwork, but there is a theory that Sitchin put forward that this was meant to be a tomb for an Anunnaki god named Alalu. That this was his face, that it's eroded, it's been beaten up a little bit. But, again, if the face on Mars is a face, and I think I can make that argument and win it every time in a court of law, then it is a piece of art. It is somebody trying to send us a message across the eons of time to our consciousness, exactly in the same way that those flying saucers are beaming knowledge into Mary's brain and into various other people's minds. So you can argue it's not art, but this is one of the really interesting experiments that Richard Hoagland ever did, which is he took the face and he mirrored left side and the right side. And when he mirrored the left side, you got a lion. And when you mirrored the right side, you got a human face, vaguely human, wearing a helmet. So is this some sort of human-feline hybrid? Is this an artistic message meant to make us think about who we are, where we came from, and who we might really be related to? In later images, it didn't change. The impression continued. These are Mars Global Surveyor images. The previous one was the Viking data, processed by Dr. Mark Carlotto. This is processed by me. Human on one side, or at least hominid, something like a Neanderthal, and a lion on the other. Now, lots of different spacecraft have gone to Mars, and they've taken pictures of the face on Mars. Here's another version I did from the European Space Agency, which was color. And when you flip-flop the human side, the right side, I started to notice other things, that there was a pattern, like a geometric pattern above the head, and when you enhance that pattern, it gets weirder and weirder and weirder. It looks like some sort of exotic, almost Tahitian type of headdress that might be embedded on the ground there. And the thing you remember is all these different spacecraft, they have different hardware, they have different software, they have different firmware. So every camera, they can look at the same thing, but they're seeing different layers. In other words, some cameras are emphasizing some details that other cameras are not. Some of them are color, some of them are black and white. But when I got into this, I started, really playing with this stuff. And the more I look at this, the more I saw weird stuff. Like, look at this is the weird kind of headdress thing that I saw in one version of the image. It looks like this was intended to be there, or maybe half of it was intended to be there. And then this one is the lion side flip-flopped. And when you do that, you again get a lot of noise, you get a lot of weird-looking stuff. And don't think there's anything wrong with you if you don't see some of these details. I mean, it is stuff that I'm used to looking at, and there's a lot of noise in these images, but you can clean that up. And when you do, you see this weird sort of headdress kind of stuff above it. You see this diadem design There's definitely 2 eye sockets. And what really weirded me out when I started, like, look at this. This looks like some sort of crest or design on the base at the bottom of the chin. And then when I enhanced a certain area of it, I saw this guy. Not Darth Vader, but you're close. Go back further. How about Ming the Merciless? Paula's a very nice lady. I'm not going to curse, but I don't know if this means something. I don't know if it means something. All I know is it's there. And if you take this image and you flip it over and you just darken it a little bit, you see there's this so is there face within a face within a face? How complex a piece of artwork could this possibly be? And the answer could be phenomenal. And someday we have to go there and start looking around and digging. Now, there are other ancient cave art depictions. The Eye of Horus, or the Eye of Ra, as this is commonly called on the right, actually it's been seen all the way back. That cave painting on the left is from France, and it is 30,000 years old. Some people think this depicts the pineal gland, which a lot of people say enhances our psychic power. I know that's one of David Wilcock's big points that he likes to make. But very, very clearly, there is some sort of there's some significance to this symbol. It's gone all the way back 30,000 years ago. And, weirdly enough, it's also on Mars. The image at the top is a, quote, rock formation that looks a lot like the Eye of Horus. At the bottom is the 30,000-year-old cave painting from France. And the more you zoom out from this, the more it looks like that's what it's supposed to be. Now, if you look in here, there's structural-looking beams and girders. Down here at the bottom, this is darker, but guess what? That's an entrance. You can actually see if the enhancement's correct. Okay, here's some of the support structure around the eye shape, and here's the entrance. You could literally walk up and go in there and worship. I mean, there's some weird stuff up here which is tubular and appears to be some sort of construction. That's an entrance. That is this part right here. Now, this one is, I don't know what this is, but it's on Mars. I've confirmed that it's on Mars. Some smart aleck, I forget his name, but he slipped this under my door of my hotel room at the Conscious Life Expo, which really irritated me that he found out which hotel room I was in. But he gave me this. And I posted this like, what the F is that? Now, if you look at this guy, he is, he's a cat. Looks like he's playing air guitar on Mars. He's 65 feet tall. There's an alcove that appears to be carved out, and it has the head of a cat. The arms are like this. The legs are there. I mean, this is a statue. And again, it breaks all my rules because normally I say if there isn't anything else artificial looking around it, I can't say it's anything but a weird rock formation, but I've never seen anything on Earth or on Mars that looks remotely like that. That you could even mistake for a 65-foot tall air guitar playing cat. So again, it's a message. It's a message in art. It's something important. Now, if you go to Earth, back to Earth, in ancient Egypt, there's a temple called the Assyrian, which is in Abydos, Egypt. And you see, I think, the ultimate expression of ancient aliens in artwork. Because the Assyrian itself there's no hieroglyphs in it. It is a temple that appears to be built in pre-dynastic times. Now, in my book, Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies, I actually argue that ancient Egypt was founded by Marduk. Marduk was a son of Enki, and he was an Anunnaki king. And it eventually became time for him to rule on Earth. He was really the last of the great Anunnaki kings. There were other guys who stayed after a while, for a while longer, and set themselves up as gods and kings, people like Goliath, who was probably the last of the living Anunnaki kings. But in the Assyrian, there is some other artwork that is up on the walls. And there is actually later on ancient Egyptian stelas and plates and paintings. And near this one column is a very, very famous and very, very controversial panel, this one right here, which depicts what some people interpret as machines, vehicles. Now, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it, but this is a helicopter, this is a tank, this is an aircraft, this is some sort of sled or speeder, and these are other fish and animals. But the interesting thing is that this particular area, this particular plate cell, it talks about war. This is supposed to be a representation of a war that was fought by the Egyptians with the gods. The 9 bows of Egypt defeated the enemy. And it just happens to be that right at that location where this newer plate fell off and this older one was exposed, that in this area where they're talking about in the hieroglyphs war, you see depictions of what are clearly war machines. That's a tank. That's a helicopter. And then later in the Assyrian, there's an area called I think it's the Chamber of the Kings. And on it is the name of every Egyptian pharaoh that ever lived, every ruler of Egypt. The thing about it is that if you look at the years that they say that they ruled, this actually goes back to about 10,500 BC, which is about 5,000 years earlier than, according to the experts, human civilization even existed. So right on the walls, in the artwork of the ancients, is the true story of the human race. And that story is that we came from somewhere else. Now again, you go back to the face on Mars. I showed you this earlier. This is the Viking image. This is a Mars Odyssey 2001 image. That's the European Space Agency images from the mid-2000s in color. And why is this thing so important as a piece of art or as something on the planet Mars? Why is it so important? I don't know, but I do know that if you want to talk about art and artwork, in 1958, there was actually a new form at that time of entertainment media. It was called a comic book. Used to have comics in the papers, and then they came out with these comic books. Well, in 1958, a guy named Jack Kirby, who knew people like Willy Ley, he knew people like Wernher von Braun, he knew a lot of people at NASA, put out a comic book. He's the guy who created, I'm trying to remember who Kirby created. I want to say the Fantastic Four, but I think that's Stan Lee. He came out with a comic book that was called The Face on Mars. Now this is, again, 20 years before the first picture of something that they called The Face on Mars was ever taken. And this is an important piece of artwork because once he got, you get into the comic book itself, what you see is a series of explorers from the planet Earth arrive on Mars. They find this gigantic face on the surface of Mars. They climb the face, and one of the astronauts falls in to the crevasse, into the eye. And when he lands at the bottom, not only does he not die, but he begins to see this vision, this incredible vision of a civilization that used to exist on the planet Mars. And what he sees is a civilization of extremely technologically advanced giants. Peaceful, living in harmony with their planet, with an atmosphere that is breathable just as Earth's was. He takes his helmet off, he can breathe the atmosphere, meaning that Mars was once exactly like Earth. And he sees them going throughout their lives, and everything's going through their lives, and everything seems to be fine until there's a sudden attack on their planet. And the interesting thing about the attack is that they appear to be spacecraft, spider kind of looking, destroying their cities, and the enemy are machines. They're mechanical. They're not actually biological aliens. So a war is fought. And this war goes back and forth with tremendous devastation on both sides. And eventually the planet Mars becomes so damaged and uninhabitable that the remaining inhabitants of these peaceful giants actually have to move underground. And when they move underground, they decide that the only way to win the war is to destroy the planet the home planet of the enemy. The home planet of the enemy is very nearby, and if you read my Mars books, I talk about the fact that Mars is very clearly not a planet in of itself. It's a moon of a much larger super-Earth planet that is no longer there. It exploded somehow. And what this book is telling us is that they launched a rocket into the other planet, and if you notice, you can see from the surface of the planet Mars the explosion of this other world, meaning it was very, very nearby, and they destroyed the enemy. So it's telling us a story that these peaceful giants, the Anunnaki, built machines to do their bidding. They built them too smart, though, and the machines rebelled. And when they rebelled, there was a war. And the way to end the war was to destroy this planet. Planet V is what Dr. Van Flandern called it. Others have called it Phaeton. And after the destruction of the planet, the atmosphere of Mars was wiped out, the civilization on Mars was wiped out, and presumably the only thing left at that point was that the giants would have had to go somewhere else to live. Now, where do you think they might have gone? The only other place that would have been similar to Earth, to Mars at that time, would be Earth. And, there's lots of other things that are interesting to me, like when an astronaut gets out of the influence of Earth's gravity and they're living on the International Space Station, their circadian rhythms, their biological rhythms go from 24 hours to 24.9 hours. Guess what the rotational period of one Martian day is? It's not 24 hours like us, it's 24.9. It implies that our genetic clocks, our internal genetic workings, are linked to Mars rather than linked to Earth, meaning that we have Martian DNA inside of us. So, to wrap this up, if you look throughout history, you can see all kinds of examples of alien spacecraft, aliens visiting the planet Earth, influencing our culture, influencing our society, looking over our shoulders at key moments in history. Are they manipulators or are they observers? Nobody really knows. But very clearly, if you look at the ancient art of ancient men and even the medieval art, you see the presence of extraterrestrial beings or some sort of exterior influence on our society. And even in today's modern comics, you clearly see that there is some sort of impact or influence on us. We're being told something. Somebody is trying to send us a message from a long time ago about who we are and where we came from. And the question is, who are we and where did we come from? I can give you my opinion, but my opinion doesn't count any more than yours. What this is all about is it's about everybody finding the truth, their truth for them, and moving forward in that and pushing it to the limits. We have the events of the last week with the election turning out. It was shocking to some people. It was not so shocking to others. But it signals that we have a chance to change everything up. We can throw out the old system. Because regardless of what President Trump regardless of what he does, that's not important. What he does is not important. What's important is what he represents, because people voted for him on the basis of the idea, a lot of people, not everybody, but they voted for him on the basis of the idea of let's tear this unfair, effed up system down and replace it with something better. So that's what's going to grow. And keep in mind, there's probably an awful lot of people that supported Bernie Sanders, who I personally disagree with his politics a lot, but they supported Bernie Sanders, and a lot of them still voted for Hillary. But the fact is that there's this movement that's going to shape, this third way that's going to shape up, that's going to be the people that supported Trump and the people that supported Sanders. We're the ones who are going to decide the future, not the old guard, not the old system. So what we have here is an opportunity to remake our planet in a new way, and hopefully a better way. I got 5 minutes left. I thought I was going to go over time. Anybody have any questions or anything you want to talk about before I... Okay.
There was these tablets, the golden tablets, that were depicting the sun and the triangle going down onto the ground.
Yeah.
Yesterday driving here, I got the same impression that looking up at the moon, I saw the triangle coming down. So it's not a coincidence that...
Yeah, you mean the golden tablets I showed way back? I'm trying to find them, yeah. There they are.
Yeah, where's that come from?
These are Egyptian, and they're like on a sort of a brass panel. It's really weird because it looks like to me it looks. Sorry, and the question was, you saw a triangle.
Any reference as far as,
Well, okay, so one of the things I like to say in my lectures, the ones that I would do on the Secret Space program on the new book, is I got pictures of triangular craft in there, and the tendency that I kind of go with is that if it looks like a disc, it's probably one of theirs. If it looks like a Dorito, it's probably one of ours. So I think these are our experimental craft because I've worked on them. Back in the late 80s, I worked on a program called the A-12 that got canceled because it was over budget and overweight, which, by the way, is how you know it's an airplane. And it was a Dorito. It was just shaped like a triangle. And then that later came out. There's a program called the UCAS, or the Unmanned Combat Air System, which is shaped like a triangle. I mean, and here's the thing. We're making the mistakes that the comic book says that the Martians, the Anunnaki, the Martians made. We're building these machines to operate autonomously, war machines. And they're getting smarter and smarter. I saw a presentation out of Joshua Tree in 2006 where they were actually taking human brain cells and like sewing them, melding them to circuit boards. So it's not going to be very long before the Cylons or Colossus or whatever you want to call it, Terminator, Skynet, is a reality if it's not already. So anyway, the triangular shaped craft I tend to think are our experimental craft. Now, if it's coming from the moon, then we have bases that are operating.
I started thinking that I've been reading about the spaceship that's underneath the Sphinx. The way that it was described, the whole 1999 event happened, was that the ship, in ancient times when it came out last before 1999, it was meant to sit on top of the pyramid.
This triangular ship. The ship, the buried ships that were found. Okay, we're meant to sit on top of the pyramids.
This is just one ship. I forget what's the name.
It was a sailing vessel, though, right? It was an Egyptian sailing vessel.
Right, and it supposedly sits underneath the Sphinx like a mountain.
Yeah. They've actually found buried ships near the pyramids, and they don't know what they were for. Anybody else? Yeah.
Two things. One, is it a fact that the Kirby comic, Face on Mars, mentioned that Face on Mars as being inside alien?
No, that is not a fact. It just simply mentions that they found a face on Mars. Sidonia is not specifically mentioned. That would be like out of control if it did. But it,
I thought hopefully at one point showed in the comic book that it said Sidonia.
I don't believe so. Because those images I got from Richard, so I think that's all he has on it. There is also a Tom Corbett Space Cadet Viewmaster slideshow, which is more specific. There's they find a tetrahedral pyramid, and inside of it is a globe of Mars with a little red dot on it, right about where Sidonia would be. That may be what he's referring to.
One other very quick point on the UFO Madonna.
Yeah.
I think if you look carefully at that guy, you think is looking at the spaceship. And maybe he's not looking at the spaceship, but he's looking at the Madonna.
Yeah, it's hard to tell the perspective because, right. He's kind of doing this too to block the sun, which might mean the sun is somewhere else. So what is that thing in the sky? So anyway, guys, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you very much for having me.